Good morning all. Today we'll be discussing a new topic in operations management known as plant layout. Now plant layout basically means how the machines and everything is arranged in the plant or any factory as such. Because if you look at different factories and different layouts, you will find that each layout is suited to a specific type of production type or a specific type of work. So according to that, we have different types of layouts. Now if you look at basic layout, the definitions, it means how equipments and machineries are arranged in a single factory. Now, moving on to objectives of plant layout, you have different objectives. The basic objective is to ensure a smooth production run, and these are some of the different objectives that are listed here. The first one is the efficient use of materials that is there or the space that is there in the factory. The second one is how to minimize the material handling costs and other costs that are there. Then you have minimize production delays to ensure less spoilage, to ensure minimize accidents, to ensure better quality. So these are some objectives of the plant layout. So the whole objective, if you look at it in general, is to help the companies or the people involved in it to reduce wastage and to increase the amount of productivity that they get from the same amount of space that they employ. Now there are several principles of plant layout. The first principle of plant layout is principle of minimum handling. It means that whenever materials and other things are moved from one place to another, the amount of time or the amount of money spent on it should be comparatively less. That is how a plant layout should be arranged. And similarly, there is a similar thing known as your minimum distance also. That whenever you move products from one place to another, the distance involved should be comparatively less. The systems should be such that whenever you look at different things, you should ensure that the amount of time or distance taken to move one thing from another place should be at its minimum. Then you have principle of utilization, because we all know that the resources that we have are comparatively very less or they are limited in a sense. So we have to ensure that there is a high amount of utilization of whatever space that we have in an organization. Then you have a principle of workflow and orderliness. That means that whenever you do something, there should be a specific flow for any type of production plant. If you look at an assembly line production plant, if you look at any other production plant, you will always find that there is a specific flow. Now this specific flow is very specific to some organizations that ensure a line plant layout. Line plant layout means, for example, if you're looking at car production, if you're looking at engine production, it always happens in a line. So there is a specific flow attached to it. If the flow is broken in some form or another, the entire production line will break. So this principle ensures, or this is to ensure that the flow does not break. Then you have principle of flexibility, that whenever there are changes in an organization, because the entire environment is very dynamic, so you require some amount of changes at one point or the another. So what will happen is you have to have certain provisions or some breathing space for some degree of flexibility. If there is no flexibility in a space, what will happen is whenever there are changes or whenever the requirements of changes, you will never be able to accommodate those changes. So that is why you require this principle of flexibility. Then one important aspect in any plant is safety, because you have a large amount of human workforce, you have a large amount of non-human workforce also. So it is important to ensure the safety of both the human and non-human workforce that is employed, because both of them are actually very costly. So you require some methods or systems in place to ensure that there is some degree of flexibility. Then you have principle of accessibility. Because you have a lot of things placed around the entire plant, you require that every person should get access to each and everything that is available very easily, or at a minimum amount of time or space that he has to require. Because otherwise what will happen is, if you look at many factories, there are many things that are kept in places where people do not have access to. Actually they require access to those things, but they'll not get access because maybe they are in some inaccessible positions. So that is why we should ensure that this accessibility principle should be very strictly followed. Then you have principle of expansion. Factories or plants in future may expand. So you should have some provision so that you can create that expansion, or you can ensure that there is some degree of expansion in the future. If that does not happen, what will happen is you will always be limited to the space you are in. You will have to create a new plant, you have to buy a new space. So rather than going for that, you should always have a layout in which accommodates future expansion. Then you also have principle of integration. Integration means integrating or co-joining of different aspects of production. So because there are many things in the factory that require close working, or they need to be coordinated. So whenever the layout should be such that it ensures a certain degree of integration. Then there are several factors influencing a plant layout. The first factor is policies of management. Now, sometimes management wants a certain type of layout. It might happen. Whether it is suitable or not, that is a secondary question. But sometimes managements prefer a certain type of layout. So you have to accommodate that accordingly. Then you have location of the plant. Whenever you have a certain amount of money, or you're situated in a specific area, so what will happen is you will be limited to a specific location. So maybe you will have to accommodate your plans or change your plans accordingly. Then you have your nature of the product. Sometimes nature of the product is such that it demands a certain type of plant layout. As I said before, for example, if it is a car manufacturing line, if it is an engine manufacturing line, it will demand a line layout. So you cannot have a different type of layout. It demands a line layout. So and if there are some other layouts, for example, if you're creating a fighter plane or you're creating a big Boeing jet, what will happen is it demands a fixed layout. Fixed layout means you will always require a fixed layout for products or services products that cannot be moved from one place to another easily. Because engines and cars can be moved in a specific line, you cannot do the same with a product layer, with a fighter plane or a big missile. So you require a different type of layout. Then you have availability of floor space. When you have limited floor space or a large amount of floor space, you can arrange your layout accordingly. If you have limited floor space, you have to make the layout so that you make the maximum use of whatever space you have. Then you have which type of industry you are in. So you might be in an industry which has some continuous processes. You might also be in an industry which has some interrupted processes. Continuous processes means the entire production process is done uninterrupted. For example, if you're in a glass factory, you cannot stop that production process. If that production process stops, what will happen is the entire production or the product will go to waste. So you cannot stop it. So that will demand a different type of layout. You might also have an interrupted process industry wherein you can stop the production in between if you want. So you can have a different plant layout that accommodates some degree of interruption. Then you have what kind of manufacturing process do you have in your organization. It might be synthetic, analytical, conditioning process, or an extractive process. And then is the volume or type of production. If you have a large amount of volume, it is ideally suited for a line layout or a product layout. If you have small amount of production, it is suited for a process layout. So it depends on what kind of volume you have when you produce goods. Now, as I said before, you have primarily some amount of layouts, and one of the most discussed layouts is your product or line layout. So assume, like I'm just showing you this in this slide, assume that you have this line layout. This is line layout means it is an assembly line. So products move in a specific line. So what you can do is whenever the product moves from one stage to another, some kind of value addition is made at each stage. So at each stage, what happens is as the previous stage completes certain processes, you can move to the next process and something is added to that process. And that is how this process is done. So the benefits of line layout is whenever you look at large production volumes and repetitive processes like car manufacturing or let's assume soap manufacturing, it is a repetitive process. You can ensure that you have a line layout. And there are 4 types of line layout. You have your straight line, which is your normally, as I showed you before. This is a straight line layout. You can use that straight line layout. Or you can have a U-shaped layout. We'll discuss that. Then you have a circular end or a odd angle layout. So this is, as I said before, your line layout in which the products or the things are arranged in a specific line, and this is also known as an assembly line layout, and it is very famous in automobile manufacturing or in manufacturing products that are repetitive in nature. So this is a straight line. As I showed you before, this is a graph of the previous photograph that we saw. So this is a straight line layout, fairly simple to understand. Then you have a U-shaped layout. U-shaped layout means the machines are arranged in a U-shaped. As you can see, it is U-shaped here, and you will have somebody at a height to supervise. So it is easy to supervise because if you have limited space, what you can do is rather than keeping it a single line or a straight line, you can actually put a curve to it and it will be a U-shape, and it will also help in easy inspection. So that is your U-shaped layout. Then you have your circular end layout. Circular end means the entire thing is arranged in a specific circle. So the things are fed from one end, and by the time it reaches the next end, it becomes a finished product. So as you can see here, it is a raw material from this end, and then you have a finished product on the other end. So this is how this will happen. So you can have a circular layout also, and this is also a form of line also. Because why? Because it is uninterrupted. Because whenever the raw material is entered from one space, it goes uninterrupted from the next space, and it is actually a line layout. And by the time you reach your end, the entire process is complete and you have a finished product. And that is how you have a circular layout. Then you also have an odd angle. Odd angle means because you do not have a specific layout and you are not very sure how to create it, you can have an odd angle layout. So this is something known as an odd angle. This is also part of a long layout. Now, the best conditions for a product layout are when you actually have large scale standardized products, as I said before, similar products, soaps, masalas, or anything else, let's say packaged noodles, and these things happen in a line layout. Then you have your when you have a lot of different machinery and other things to do it, because it requires a certain degree of automation. Because when you look at a lot of production, as I showed you before, you require a lot of different machines and different things to be conducted. So you require different machines. Then you always require a lot of people and workers to be in that line cut, because this is a continuous process. You cannot stop it. So this, because it is uninterrupted, you require somebody to ensure that this process goes on uninterrupted. So you require a workforce, large amount of workforce. Then a previous operation, whenever you look at each stage, there should be validation at each stage. So whenever one stage, for example, there are 3 stages, A, B and C, the product cannot go to the stage B without the completion of stage A. So that should go in a line format. As we saw before, you have this flow or orderliness principle. So this follows that flow and orderliness principle. Then you move on to your disadvantages of product layout. There are several disadvantages. One biggest is inflexibility, because you cannot stop in between. Because the production is going on, you cannot stop processes in between. That is one problem that you might face. Then you have huge capital investment. These huge factories, gigafactories as you call them now, as you have seen in Tesla. So these require a huge amount of capital investment in terms of a lot of machines and other automation, software. So you require a lot of money pumped into it. Then you have your high overhead costs. Overhead means your high fixed cost, because you have huge capital investment in terms of land, building, machinery, or expensive software. So these are huge overhead costs. Whether you build or not, it is nobody's concern, but you have to pay those huge overhead costs. Then you have, if there is a breakdown, for example, if a machine, in the several processes that happens, if a machine breaks down, what will happen is the entire process will stop. Then you have difficulty in supervision. Because the process happens so quickly, it is not very easy to supervise. The speed is also a problem here for supervision, because if it is a slow process, you can supervise it pretty easily. If it is a fast process, it is tough to supervise. Then you have expansion is difficult, because you need huge capital investment to expand. Because every kind of expansion would require a large amount of capital investment, so expansion is difficult. And sometimes there will be certain amount of idle capacity, because when you have to start production, you require a huge process or a huge plant setup. So what will happen is you will have a certain amount of idle capacity which will go useless. So that is one negative of this plant layout. Then product layout advantages are, as we've discussed before, there are limited bottlenecks, there are economies in material handling, it saves time, it reduces the investment in inventory, it is easy to inspect, as you've seen in the U-shaped format. Then you have your reduction in labor costs, okay, because most of things are handled by the machines, and that is how it is done. Then you have your process or functional layout. Rather than thinking as a process or functional layout, it is easy to understand in a way in which you say that different processes and functions are grouped together. And these functions may be independent of each other. For example, if it is a lathe, it will have different functions. For example, you might have grinding, you might have drilling, you might have different other activities taking place within a lathe. And it is not necessary that each product that goes into the lathe goes through each and every process. So all of these different processes are grouped together, all grinding machines are grouped together, all welding machines are grouped together, or all smoothing machines are grouped together. And whichever process a product requires, it will go through that process, and it is not necessary that the product will go through each and every process. That is why it is called a functional layout, because the layout is arranged according to the different functions conducted or done by the different set of machines that are grouped together. And that is how it is done. And then this is an example of a this process layout, in which you have different, as I said, it was a lathe department, so you have different other things that are going on. You have your milling department, drilling department, you have your painting, your assembly department, your receiving and shipment, and your grinding department. So these different things are actually arranged in an order in which the specific items or the specific functions or processes are grouped together. And as you can see, the whole process is very haphazard, because it is not necessary that each product will go through each and every activity. You might have several products that don't even reach the painting department. So you are not going through a specific line. These are arranged according to different departments, and if the product requires, or if the production process requires that the product should go through a specific department, it will grow. And that is how it is done. Then you have advantages. Look, because it requires a lower amount of capital investment, many people will prefer it. And you have high degree of flexibility, because you can do as you want. You can interrupt the process, you can do as you want, so you can do a lot of different things. You have a lot of flexibility, you can specialize. As in lathes, you have different people who specialize in different types of works, because they have different specific functions. The processes and other things are arranged in a specific function, so it is easy to arrange it accordingly. It can be supervised easily. The work schedules are not disrupted, because there is no specific work schedule in the first place, because you can arrange it as you wish. Then you have lower overhead cost, because you have lower capital investment. Then there are several disadvantages. One is it requires a lot of floor area, because you have arranged according to different functions. The floor area, it requires a lot of different floor area. Then you have material handling costs are high. You have difficulties to control. You also have some increased cost, because sometimes you have a lot of machines that are there that are sitting idly. Those functions may not be as popular as the other functions that you offer. So this might. Then you have a combined or a hybrid layout. It is a mix of both product and process layout. So you can have, so this enables the person or the user to have the benefits of both and to eliminate the problems from both. So you can have a combined or a hybrid layout if it suits you. It is not necessary everybody should do it. It depends on what you require. And this is an example of a combined layout, wherein you have your product layout, you also have your process layout. So you can have your product layout and your process layout in the same place. As you can see here, this is your process layout, this is your product layout. You can have both of these things in the same place. You can also ensure that materials move from one place to another accordingly, and then accordingly, if you require some interruption, you can do that, as you can see here. So you're combining both of these processes together. And this is a very popular thing with large manufacturers when they produce, not large manufacturers, when they produce equipments that are very large or big in nature, like aircrafts, missiles, and other things that cannot be moved from one place to another very easily. So what they do is they have this kind of a product layout, wherein you have the product in the center and everything else is arranged accordingly. You have the product in the center, as you can see the aircraft is in the center, and everything else is arranged accordingly. That is how this process is done. What are the advantages? The advantages are you have limited handling of materials, okay, because you don't have to move, the thing is there. Then you have quality workmanship, because it has to require, because the product is there, everybody's around it, so there's a high degree of inspection, and you can also very easily ensure that the quality is very high. And you have a large degree of flexibility, because nobody is doing many other works, everybody is focusing on the product at hand. Then you have your, as I said before, you can focus on a lot of quality, and these products are also a bit costly, because if many people are involved in creation of one product, so that one product would be very expensive. Disadvantages: time consuming, it is costly, and it is also space consuming. A single plane, if you need to create it, you require a huge infrastructure. Okay, so that is why it requires these things. So thank you so much for the class. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.